Two little mice fell into a bucket of cream. The first mouse quickly gave up and drowned, but the second mouse, he struggled so hard that he eventually churned that cream into butter. And he walked out. Amen.
Welcome to Successful Dropout. This podcast is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those that dare to dream and act on their dreams. I'm your host, Kylan Ginger. Join me as we find out what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. What's up, fam squad? I've got some pretty exciting news. If you listen to the podcast much, you know we've been building a pretty vibrant community of truly extraordinary people who have committed to an unconventional route through life. The Successful Dropout audience has been growing a lot, and I get a lot of people reaching out to me now with all sorts of questions regarding education, dropping out, opting out, entrepreneurship, resources, networking, etc. So much so that I decided it was time to create a more accessible community on Facebook so that we can all ask and answer these kinds of questions together, as well as celebrate our successes and encourage each other during inevitable adversity. So I've created a closed Facebook group, and I want to invite you to join it. If you follow Successful Dropout, if you resonate with our philosophy and want to help me grow this thriving community, go to successfulDropout.com/group. This community is for the rebels, the outliers, the innovators, the doers, and those who dare to dream and act on their dreams. If you're a dropout, an opt-out, if you're thinking about doing one of those things, if you're a parent, even if you aren't any of those things and you graduated school, I want to invite you to join. All that matters is that you resonate with the Successful Dropout philosophy and that you enter the group with the intention to provide value to the other members and not just receive value yourself. Again, go to successfuldropout.com/group to request admission. Once you're a part of the group, introduce yourself and get involved, and I'll see you there. Well, what is up, Successful Dropouts? Get stoked because today on the show we have Andrew Schneck. When Andrew was in college, he broke up with girls to spend more time in the library studying finance and long-term investing. His interest in this led him to study more than half of the 3,000 public companies in the U.S., attend shareholder meetings, and he even got in touch with a few billionaires. This activity put him on the map at his school as a hardworking and budding entrepreneur. It wasn't long until a college buddy's father invited Andrew to join him in building a healthcare business. In 2016, Andrew went from 0 to 100 quickly as that healthcare business grew. And Andrew, we're stoked to have you on the show, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, thanks. I would say I got started with business through finance, through investing. As you said, I got into a lot of research, a lot of reading. Before I, jumped in the water to see if I could swim, I read a lot of books to see if I could, if I wouldn't make any mistakes with my own savings, and you kind of open up an entirely new world to me. So, I would say in some areas I have my own novel ideas, and others a lot of it is borrowed and stolen from a lot of successful people of the past. But very much a scholar and historian of business and finance and all of that through maybe the last 150 years, and a lot of that is applied to my personal life. So
interesting. So long-term finance, how did you get so interested in that in college?
Well, there are certain books out there that you might call framework books that kind of teach you how to conceptualize a subject. So rather than go into detail into one little area, they kind of show you the lifestyle or what is possible through a field. And I happened to pick up the first book I ever picked up on investing was maybe the best framework book on it. So that got me started down this path of what is possible, what could I do with my life, rather than unplugging from our school system and feeling kind of disconnected from this maybe not this full lie, but this poorly delivered lifestyle that's been given to all of us from an early age. So yeah.
And so you were telling me a little bit about that. You said you felt more like an opt-out, like you never really seriously were going to college.
I seriously went to college for about a month and a half, maybe a month.
Sounds like me.
Yeah, and it's pretty obvious when you get there. You're told this college is this beautiful place where all your dreams come true, and in some ways, for a lot of people, that is the case. But I know for me, I left feeling like, man, is this really it? Is this where I'm going to be the next 4 years? And if so, like, do I want to be spending my money, or in my case, my parents' money on being here? It doesn't feel right. I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of it. And I looked into transferring. It looked like the other Ivy Leagues, like Harvard, had the exact same curriculum with just better professors. That didn't really appeal to me. So I ultimately just kind of opted out and said, they won't let me drop out. My parents are forcing me to do this. I got to stay in the family, so to speak. I kind of got to just pretend like I'm in college. So that's about pretty much what I did.
So you were basically still enrolled, maybe attending class, but focusing most of your time studying these companies and long-term finance and stuff like that.
No, I didn't attend class.
Oh, really?
No. I mean, I probably
you just lived on the campus, or did
pretty
you
much,
live
yeah.
on campus?
I woke up every day. It was pretty simple. I walked to the library, spent 8, 10, 12 hours in the library, maybe left for food, came back, and then walked home, watched maybe an episode or two or TV before I went to bed. Yeah, life was pretty exciting, so that was kind of how I got through freshman year. I put on a bunch of weight just because of how much I went to the library. I think I probably gained like 40 pounds, and it was not because of drinking. It was mostly because of going to the library. So
just sitting and reading all day.
Yeah.
So at what point then did you drop out? I mean, what kind of led you to be able to make that decision? Despite your parents.
Well, I reached out to a lot of professors. You're there for finance. In my case, you might as well talk to the professors who are considered some of the best in the country. The grad program at IU was very serious. Those guys really took themselves seriously. A lot of academic papers, things like that. And invariably, every single one I reached out to, with maybe the exception of one, had no interest in helping students outside of their classes. So they were kind of there for the classes as their chores, and then they did their academic papers and studies, and they didn't really do anything in between. I tried talking about valuation with a guy who said on the website that his he loved valuation. He wanted to talk about how do you value a company? How do you value a piece of real estate or something? And after emailing him 3 or 4 times with no response, I showed up and I was asked to leave. So that was good. Yeah.
You were asked to leave. So tell me a little bit more about that story. That sounds interesting.
Well, he wasn't actually there. It was 2 of his colleagues shared an office with him, and they said, "Oh, I wouldn't recommend trying this. He doesn't really work with students." And and I said, "Okay, well, maybe." So I emailed him one more time. I said, "Your colleagues, suggested that you don't really work with students. What is it that you do here?" kind of thing. And his response was, he finally responded and said, "If you're so talented, you don't need me," kind of thing. So I don't know.
Wow. Some people's kids, man.
Yes. I mean, a lot of that went into this mentality is like, well, memorizing a term for something in accounting or something is not going to help me. And I want to learn how to apply these skills to something tangible. They just care about forcing a bunch of information in your head, and hopefully you then figure out how to use it. So I don't know. But.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between studying to the test and you're just ingesting a bunch of information to regurgitate it onto a piece of paper, or studying to an actual real life, problem.
Yeah.
Something you can actually apply it to and gain experience from. Yeah, learning by doing. But I'm curious, Andrew, what were you homeschooled at all?
No.
Well, I'm just curious because what was it about your upbringing maybe that you can pinpoint that was making you think and kind of act this way in college? I mean, it seems like right off the bat, similar to me, you were just like, yeah, just month 1, like, I know this is not for me. And that's not typical. And I was homeschooled. I was kind of brought up in this environment that people just thought differently, and I was allowed to think and act differently. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for me. But I don't know, what was it about your upbringing maybe that you could pinpoint that gave you that sort of mentality?
So you were one of those weird homeschool kids, huh? No, I'm just kidding.
It's a good observation.
No,
luckily I had enough social activities to keep me from. But I totally, dude, we go to these homeschooling conferences, and I mean, I don't mean offense to anybody who's homeschooled out there, but a lot of the times homeschoolers can be pretty socially awkward. I totally get where you're coming from.
No, I'm kidding. I didn't really know many homeschool kids anyway, but yeah. No, so some of this comes into like a larger story maybe, but it's this mentality of having values and knowing why you're doing any particular thing during the day. So, you grow up with your parents' set of values. In my case, my mom instilled honesty in me harder than you could probably instill in most people. I feel bad if I do certain things that are not only dishonest but inequitable to others. But other areas, my father works harder than almost anyone else I've ever met. And unfortunately, he works for a hospital system where that means almost nothing, but except for the patients. But with growing up with some of these frameworks and these values, you can go so far in life. But even the combination of your parents, you're only going to go so far with it unless you're from remarkable families who have already done amazing things, who already understand the world at a much deeper contextual level than maybe you ever have, or that most people have. So I had my set of values, which would put me ahead in certain areas, and then I happened to meet someone junior year of high school in my SAT class of all places, who also was not there really caring very much about the material. And we hit it off, completely unrelated to academic or professional work. And that story is maybe not best for this, but it's ridiculous. This guy lives larger than life in pretty much every area. And I would describe it as kind of like being struck by lightning, or like being really awakened all of a sudden of like, again, what is possible and everything else. And that was kind of the beginning of, getting off the conveyor belt or living life no longer as maybe like a muggle, as they say in the Harry Potter world. So it's like getting away from the muggle mentality, getting off the conveyor belt, getting away from doing things the way everybody else does them because that's the way they've always been done. And then, me being incredibly competitive, I'm not fun to be around if you beat me in something. So, being competitive, him talking about finance, him slowly like feeding me these cool ideas and information and me not understanding them. That is why I picked up the first book on finance. So that was like this gradual, maybe 6-month process of being very good friends with this guy. And then led me to the watering hole. And that's when I started to drink, so to speak. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, interesting. I mean, you mentioned it might not be appropriate for the podcast, or I don't know what you meant by that, but I'm kind of curious actually, like what was it about this guy that impacted you so much? So I've always been introspective, and I'm aware of my place in the universe, at least maybe not on a daily basis, but on a monthly basis, I'll reassess that quite a bit. So at the time, I was very, very focused on trying to get out of this like video game lifestyle, no social life, like, a couple friends. Not that they were bad people, but just it wasn't enough for me in high school by junior year. And I was starting to try and meet girls and trying to get out and be more social. And right. And he sits down next to me and starts showing me things on his phone from girls he had met. So that was how we first became friends. So he kind of gave you a glimpse into this social lifestyle that you could have, maybe. Again,
it's more important than anything to know what is possible and know that you can very easily plug in. Not necessarily that you can do it tomorrow, but that it is possible. So, yeah.
Yeah, sounds like he just changed your perspective.
No, he did. He definitely did.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into this skill of introspectivity because that's so important. I mean, I was just talking with somebody the other day about how important of a skill that is when you are that age and when you're kind of going through your last few years in high school, your first couple years in college. That's such a critical time in your life to start to think, just to start to know, your place in the universe as you decide ultimately what direction to go in life. And some people, I feel like that comes more naturally, and some you don't. That doesn't come more naturally. And I would attribute a lot of that to just the institutionalization that people go through, through the formal school system and stuff like that. I mean, there's really very little opportunity to think for yourself and spend just hours kind of pondering your place in the universe and what you're meant to do with your life. I was reading Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto, the other day, and he was kind of breaking down the hours in an average student's week, and it was really surprising that there's literally only, by the time you you take out, time at school, and then time spent doing homework after school, time spent kind of socializing, watching TV, playing video games and stuff. There's only like a few hours every week where somebody's just kind of being with themselves and understanding themselves, looking, inside to find out who you really are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and your place in the universe. It's really surprising. And so I'm curious for you, do you have any practical advice for our listeners on how to just be better at being introspective?
I think it's like, it's not something I ever actively tried to do. I would get into these weird sadness moments, and I'm not sure if this, I can briefly touch on this separately, but mental health issues in my past are pretty severe, even, before the last 5 or 6 years. But I don't know if it's somehow tied to this, but I would get into these periods of sadness, and it was not depression. It was not, crippling in any way. It was actually a positive thing where you have this kind of weird, sad feeling, and you kind of look at yourself, and it's not like a narcissism thing where you say I'm the best in the world and everybody else sucks kind of thing. It's more of like a not a hard look at yourself, but just like a feeling, and you start to really assess little parts of your life. Certain movies would bring this out in me. So American Beauty is my all-time favorite movie. I've always watched that whenever I get into the bad place.
Is that the one with Shia LaBeouf?
No.
Or am I thinking of something different?
I'm not sure what that is, but it's Kevin Spacey.
Okay.
It's made around 2000, I think, and Office Space is the other. But they're similar type of story where basically the main character is living a life that is nonsense, but it's what society tells you you're supposed to live. And then they wake up in one way or another, and they go about changing their life and for themselves, and in a result, it impacts everyone around them in funny ways or in serious ways. Some of them positive, some negative. But at the end of the story, it kind of all comes together. And that disruption not necessarily is bad, but you should not live for others as much as you should also try to make sure you're also taking care of yourself. And anytime I've had some serious life inner quandaries, these movies help me a lot. That friend that I previously mentioned from high school that changed my perspective on things. Him and I talked probably anywhere from 2 to 5 times a week on the phone because we did not live in the same town in Pittsburgh. And that very much allowed us to, we would go into detail on literally anything. So, hey, your buddy said this about you. You should really watch yourself. It was not meant to be like, telling on our friends or anything like that. It was much more, hey, introspective and like use this as a growing experience. And, 1 week of that may not change much, but doing this very seriously over the course of a year and a half really helped me grow a lot. So I don't know.
So you're saying you were talking about stuff with him as detailed as like somebody would say something to you, and a lot of times the words people say to you can really impact, your perception of the world and your perception of yourself. So you'd like go into detail about that and kind of how to combat maybe a negative perception that somebody was giving you of yourself, or does that kind of make sense?
Or of each other. I mean, it was literally like, hey, I heard, XYZ said, they're worried about your honesty. You might want to like check that a little bit, even if you are going to be just dishonest, like try to hide it a little bit better or something, and then, hey, I'm trying to, what do you think about this girl situation? Or what do you think about this social group? Like, let's try and become friends with these guys. Or, it's very proactive, very, very like young and healthy. And as much as, I don't know, it was good. It was maybe a little odd to our parents that were on the phone with each other a lot, but I know that was very helpful. And then, I have a journal that I kept from, I have a girlfriend I dated in high school who encouraged me to start writing a journal. And I did not start out with any intention of ever publishing it, but that allowed me to get my thoughts down a little bit too and write to my future self. So some things like that kind of help. I don't know.
No, I mean, the reason I'm trying to stay on this so long is because I'm trying to just kind of go deep into this because I feel like it's something really important that doesn't come up on the show very often, and it's this idea of constantly just having an internal dialogue, and if you can have that, with somebody else as well, just kind of struggling with some of the most basic questions of life, I think that's so powerful because we get caught up in just formal schooling and just what we're supposed to do next, the social pipeline and conveyor belt that everybody's on, and it leaves so little room for introspection. Because I totally get where you're coming from, and I have 2 friends actually that I've known for like 14, 15 years, and they're still my best friends. And we have just crazy deep conversations about stuff like that I feel like most people don't don't even bother talking about. I mean, the other day we had a conversation for like 2 hours on death and what it means to be like afraid of death versus, you know, not afraid of death, and what kind of life do you have to live to not be afraid of death, and you know, kind of the things that you know you want to do with your life, getting those out of your system to where you look back and you don't have any regrets and stuff like that. And so, yeah, that's great.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's exploring these things are important, and I think it's important to have people who are going to call you out on things too, you know, and say, hey, you know, you're using your hands just like Trump does. You should just avoid that. Or, you know, even little things like that, you know, people are not going to tell you the little things. They're just going to kind of assume that's part of your personality. But if you knew them, you may not necessarily engage in that stuff anymore. And everyone kind of has a blind spot about themselves that, you know, you think that's, you know, so I think that's important. I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say to kind of top off this topic is to find, because have you been friends? Are you still friends with this guy?
Yeah, I'm trying to get him to quit his job to work with me. So we'll see what happens.
Gotcha. Yeah. I just think it's so important to have relationships like that, where you're able to wrestle with those kinds of questions. So I'd encourage anybody listening, if you don't have friends that can go deep in conversation like that, I would encourage you to find them. I know, again, just thinking about the relationships I have with these two guys, and actually one of them has been my long-term business partner as well. Man, we talk about, and I perceive who he is. I've worked with him enough, and he perceives who I am. And so it's such a valuable thing to be able to, he can be like, look, I noticed you were acting this way in this situation, or this is the kind of person I perceive you to be. And it's like, you would never, ever know that unless, you know, we take all these personality tests and it tells us kind of who we are, you know, but there's only one personality test I found out there that will tell you how the rest of the world perceives you. And I can't remember what that is, but I'll link it to the show notes here because it's really good. But yeah, that's so important to have a relationship with somebody so close to you where they can say like, hey, this is the way that you are. This is how I perceive you, and the rest of the world perceives you. And you can kind of adjust, you know, your habits and your beliefs and stuff based on that. But anyway,
and I'd also say it's important to be vulnerable a little bit, to allow yourself to not just be, you know, it's one thing to put on a front if you're like that, you know, with most people, but forging deep relationships, you kind of got to let that happen, or very much like deliberately try to let it happen. So I don't know.
Yeah, go deep. Yeah. That's great, man. Okay, we'll leave that alone for now. So tell me the story of kind of that moment that you quit college. Was it kind of simultaneous with your buddy's father, the physician, approaching you and asking you to work, you know, build this company with him, or?
Well, that was much later. You know, college was, you know, 2009 was when I decided college was nonsense and I wasn't going to do it anymore. And that decision was very much just kind of like, you know, society tells you, hey, you're supposed to row the boat, you're supposed to row it here, you're supposed to go across the lake, da 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 da. And then you look down and the boat is just like a skateboard, and you're like, what the hell is going on? You know?
That's a great analogy. I like that.
Something like that is like, what am I doing here? And you start paddling and you realize it's a waste of your energy and your time. So that decision was, again, tied to the professors, tied to even the students. Most people were focused on Greek life, drinking, other things like that. I focused on professional academic groups, things like that, and it came together pretty well over time. You kind of just establish yourself as working harder than other people. They're going to seek you out, and sometimes for good reasons, and sometimes for bad. But you know, people would try to use you for things. But I would say post college, I had some health issues. It's kind of a weird path how I got to doing what I'm doing now. So I had some health issues towards the end of college. You know, if you assume you have 4 years to do something, and you're like me, you're going to spend the first 3 years preparing, you know, and you're going to spend all this time doing research and reading. Most of the work I've done was handwritten. It was not shared with another human being. I have handwritten notes from hundreds, if not thousands, of companies I've looked at, and these were meant for me. They were not meant for other people. It was so I could develop my process over and over again, so that I could go from, you know, fixing a spare tire in 3 hours to fixing it in 3 minutes, just kind of thing. Is being that good at finance, getting that good at understanding things. Give me a company now, I can tell you in 3 minutes if pretty much everything you would need to know about it from an investing perspective. That was not the main goal, but it was meant to be that good at it. So
what about if I just said Apple?
I mean, So if we're going to specifically focus on Apple without me having any report in front of me, most of that is tied to technological. This is more of a story on the tech industry and less a story of Apple as an investment today. Apple is an investment today. If you had the same business with the same economics, did anything else in the world where it didn't have to reinvent itself every 5 years or so with their tech platform, then I would say go for it. The price is great. Investing is there. You got a giant pile of cash, no chance of going under. You have capable management who are able to keep the existing business more or less where it is. The unfortunate thing is you've got a bunch of people outside the moat with sniper rifles trying to take you out. And until you keep building the walls higher, keep building out more defenses and everything else. And I think Apple could do that to a degree, but I'm not really as involved in specifics of technology, so I'm not going to be able to comment as much. That's more of a long-term discussion for people who are really into that stuff. But there are businesses out there where there are no sniper rifles outside the moat who are trying to shoot you, and you got to keep that in mind. So you say, okay, well, this is Apple. There's 10,000 other stocks out there that you've studied already, and you know at least 3,000 of them do not meet that criteria of like someone's trying to kill you. So from that perspective, Apple's not one I would buy. But
interesting. What do you mean by somebody trying to kill you exactly? The snipers.
So I've got
just like different technologies trying to.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Google's trying to do similar things. Other device makers are working together with software makers to make similar products. If nothing else, if the price came down for Apple stuff, that alone kills the business. So they need to maintain a premium. They cannot just keep making great phones and everything. They have to keep a premium over whatever else is doing and keep people paying that premium. So there's a lot that goes into it. But at the end of the day, it is you no longer have a revolutionary thinker in charge of the company. You really got to find one. You got to find somebody, or somebody's going to push it a little harder than somebody's just going to make their supply chain better. So,
I like it. I'm impressed. It definitely seems like you know what you're doing.
I've been forced into my fair share of talks about Apple. Let's just say that much.
I should have picked a harder one.
No, it's just most people don't study companies, so that's like there's only maybe 15 they can talk about. But
that's interesting. Okay, so let's go back to your story. Then you were taking all these notes that were meant just for you, and continue on there.
Well, it's funny because if you look at one of my first 20 companies I looked at versus one I did last month. It's hilarious how much better I've gotten at understanding, conceptualizing the numbers and what's going on and everything else. So this process was, again, meant for internal education. This was my schooling, so to speak. And right around the time when I started to look at doing something with it, I was actually trying to start a company with some friends, unrelated to investing, but still being the finance and research guy in the group. I pushed myself into the hospital. I had a lot of mental health issues, and that took away the next probably year and a half of productivity. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and then the next year or so I was recovering. That's pretty serious for a mental event. Mental.
Serious.
You cannot see it on another person, but as soon as you start talking to them, you can kind of tell something's not right. So that was tough. More than I will get into maybe is how hard this journey has been, because that was not the first and only hospitalization. I've had 3 of them now. So. From the point of junior year, second semester, up until the end of college, I was more or less focused on my mental health and recovery, and miserable and feeling like maybe I'll never recover, all these things. So I took a job that was safe, very conveyor belt, using despite what I just said with education, I actually had a decent GPA, and someone hired me for. Despite having maybe gone to 1 out of 15 classes a week or something, someone hired me to work at a bank. And I worked there for a year after school. It was eye-opening in every way imaginable, and I tried to quit. But within 2 months, again, of trying to quit, after I started, I was hospitalized again. So that kept me there for another year. A lot of lost productivity between 2012 and now. But I know these are long stories, and maybe not worth fully getting into all the detail, but. This is kind of a pattern of getting stuck along the journey, assuming that there is no health issues in front of you, and then getting multiple health issues really prevented the kind of the end of my success or being able to manifest all that hard work into something tangible. So 18 months ago, I was bussing tables, and I was working at a restaurant to pay for my car, which I had unfortunately bought, and then was tied with a liability despite no income because I got hospitalized soon after. So So I'm forced to pay for my car. I'm homesick. I can barely do anything. I'm bussing tables. And I happen to run into an old friend who knew me from college as that guy who works hard. And he put two and two together because he was trying to get friends to come down and work with him. It's not easy to start a healthcare company. And he found a way to get me here. And that was kind of I needed something to work on, and I was in the process of trying to start a business, which is still probably going to happen at some point. But this is what I ended up doing because it was a way to do it through somebody else and with somebody else. So,
okay, I got you. And I want to get into that, but Andrew, I wonder if you would feel comfortable sharing some of the mental health stuff you were dealing with, just because. I don't know. One of our most popular episodes was with Braun Shed, and he came on and he really talked about some real serious and deep stuff that he struggled with. And I think people, love to hear that. And it sounds like it was such a central part of your kind of what shaped you and your struggle and something you had to overcome. And so, I mean, if you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear some about that.
So I am more than comfortable with it. The unfortunate thing is there's a lot of shitty people in the world. And I think specifically a diagnosis being shared would not be productive at this stage. So I look at it as I'm happy to go into detail as to all aspects of what I've experienced. But for whatever reason, when somebody has a diagnosis to attach to someone's name, things tend to change a little bit. And I've seen it personally, and I've seen it in ways that I would have never expected. And I would just call it raw ignorance at the end of the day, and shameful behavior. So without getting angry and getting into those stories, I would just say if there's something that has the potential to limit myself in some way in the future because of simple things being shared, I would shy away from it. I would say on a more broad level, I've learned how to listen to my brain and get it to a place where I can control a lot of little things that a lot of other people probably wouldn't know how to do because of being fragile and kind of getting hit really hard multiple times, like getting hit by a car multiple times, maybe more sensitive to pain or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I would say you need to listen to your brain. I think entrepreneurs very much tend to turn off their body signals, or at least I do, and say, okay, well, I'm tired, but I'm just going to keep working because I'm this hardworking guy, and I'm just going to keep doing it. And that is important to a degree. You can't be a couch slob the rest of your life, but at the same time, I would say you need to know what the difference is between like your body telling you something and like an acute problem that is developing, and most people are not going to be able to tell the difference until it's too late. So this is something I would like to explore more down the road. I think I'm probably going to wait until it's out of the question that this could impact me personally. And I hate to say that because I'm very much an advocate for mental health. We have a behavioral health clinic. We literally treat this, but it's unfortunately not something I can fully get into. So,
okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. So then let's go from basically the launch or when you first started working on what's the startup called? I forget.
Cleanse Clinic.
Cleanse Clinic.
Yeah.
So, what was that like getting that going, and what exactly do you guys do, and how is it different from healthcare in general? How are you kind of disrupting the industry?
So I would say we're not disrupting the industry yet, at least the way, if you look at how you might say the word disruption or what it means as far as like getting competitive response from other companies. Right. But I would say, so what we do is we treat opiate addiction specifically. So if you've opened a newspaper in the last 12 months, you'd know there's an epidemic going on in the United States. And there is a lot of problems here with people who, if you were able to take away this chemical dependency issue of needing heroin or needing painkillers on a daily basis and allow them to just like exist, you literally don't need to do a lot for them outside of that. We still try to, but if you can take away that dependency, and that's what a lot of them want, is just to be left alone and take away my need for heroin every day. Then they're able to go on and find jobs, get their spouses back, get their kids back from Child Protective Services, maybe fulfill some legal requirements, not go to jail. Some of these things are really important, but there is no supply of people like us in the country. So there's only one other company that I can identify in the state of Kentucky who does it like we do. and they are run by people who are real estate experts, and they are not medical professionals. I am not a medical professional, but I at least try, and these guys don't seem to try. So that would be the kind of the Kentucky framework, and Kentucky's got better service provision than most places. So Ohio is pretty screwed right now. Indiana's pretty screwed. Pennsylvania is pretty screwed. Tennessee's pretty bad. Florida's really bad.
When you say screwed, you're talking in terms of.
So you can look at opiate use per capita and say, okay, where there are certain areas. I actually have a map right here on my whiteboard, but it's not a uniform distribution across the country. There's certain pockets that, for whatever reason, have more or less heroin users, and in the areas that I just described, these are really full-fledged, a lot of problems going on. Kentucky happens to be one of them, and there's not enough service providers, not enough doctors doing this. And most of this is actually a regulatory problem. It's our government's fault in many respects, and not because they're deliberately trying to cause a problem. It's literally they don't realize what they're doing. So okay, let's walk down the path of the physician. So you have two choices. You are either going to you think of yourself as a good person. You want to help out people with an addiction problem, and you identify this problem. You read about it in the paper. You say, I am going to start helping people with heroin problems tomorrow. You have two choices. The first choice is you open up a cash clinic, which has no regulatory oversight besides just same health codes and stuff that you'd have for a restaurant, and like very minimal. Like there's one small thing you have to do to be able to prescribe Suboxone. Outside of that, very minimal. And you could be open within a couple weeks, probably, if you were so inclined. Now separate that with trying to accept insurance, which is where the real value comes in. If you're a heroin addict, you have no money, you have no ability to pay for things. So at best, you might be able to take your money that you were using for heroin or painkillers and then spend it on treatment. But a lot of these people have gone further down the path and have no ability to pay for this. So a disproportionate number of people who use heroin and painkillers end up being in the Medicaid system, which is low income, and as a result, nobody is taking insurance. And to take insurance as a doctor, you need to have special state licenses that you get to be able to operate. So you have to get a behavioral health license, at least in the state of Kentucky you do, it's the behavioral health license, and a separate license for treating alcohol and drug treatment. So these two licenses took us 5-6 months of doing nothing else, and I'm not a slow study. Okay, I'm really not. I promise you, I work faster than most people you probably know, and it took us this long. My partner and I are working on this every day, and we are not doctors who, in the meantime, could be making $200,000-$400,000 a year working. Instead, taking that time away to do this, it's not possible. So you have to hire someone and then pay them to do it, and then hope that they set it up in a proper way. So that alone is burdensome and prevents most people from accepting insurance. There is an additional insidious thing that goes on, which is the state then requires you get a national accreditation. So after you get your 2 state licenses, then you have to go on and similar to, if you're familiar with like finance, there's like S&P, Moody's, Fitch for rating bonds and things like that. They're private companies that issue a rating that matters on a regulatory basis. Similar way in healthcare, there is something called Joint Commission or CARF or some of these other ones that you have to get. You can pick one with us. We actually got to choose, which still didn't matter, but we had to go through this process, and that's due next Monday. So that's what I've been going through the last couple months, and I've been bleeding from the eyes getting this done. But again, if you're a doctor, single doctor practice, good luck. Like you need a lot of resources. You need a lot of people who are very talented, working around the clock for months to get this open. Meanwhile, people are dying every day. I think it's 90 people a day die from heroin or painkiller overdoses. Every day, 90 people dead, not overdosed, dead. So this is something where it's a race against the clock, but it's really a race against the regulatory clock. It's not a race against the actual clock. And the people who have gone out and gotten these licenses, the national ones, after the state ones, then you say, okay, with all these resource constraints we had, now we need to find some way to grow. And if they're not very enterprising or they're not business people, right, they're not going to make it very far. So I've only identified a handful, maybe less than 10, of companies who have our licenses, who have multiple facilities, and who are accepting insurance in the entire country. And that's less than probably 5% of service provision. Most of it's, again, these cash doctors. So there's an enormous opportunity for someone who can accept insurance, knows the market, knows what to do, knows how to treat the patients, and can kind of grow their practice from that perspective.
Scale a business, yeah. Really interesting.
Well, and that's the next piece. So the scalability is knowing your economics, knowing what you want to do and what you don't want to do. There's a lot of levers that we've pulled and things we've pulled off to make this possible, to accept Medicaid. So Medicaid pays far less than commercial insurance or Medicare or a self-pay. So if you made $100 for Medicare, so you treat an old person, $100 for the service, you treat a poor person in the Medicaid system, same exact service, same everything. Instead of making $100, you make $55.
Oh, wow.
So there is that big of a gap. And then commercial pays you about $120. So if you want to say, let's treat the Medicaid population, they're the ones that need this the most, you have to go through, again, about a year of licensing and all this other nonsense. And then once you're done with all this stuff, then you somehow have to find a way to make it profitable. And most people are not creative enough, or not that we're doing anything bad, but it's insane. It's absolutely insane. Yeah, and that's what we do. So we only treat Medicaid. We only treat Medicaid.
Really?
Yeah.
That's phenomenal, man. I had no idea that there was such a. I mean, I knew there was kind of an issue, but I've never heard it explained in depth like that. I mean, you're in it, building a solution, and so it's really fascinating and sad at the same time, but also really neat that you are building basically a solution to that, and hopefully, I hope as you continue to figure out and grow, you're able to teach and mentor others to be able to do the same thing and kind of lead by example.
I mean, I'm a finance guy, so I'm going to scale this, but we'll get people doing other stuff. I think there's a need for this in other areas of healthcare. But
so if I'm addicted to heroin and I come to your facility, what kind of process do I go through to?
So we do a very basic collection of your information when you call. So you don't just show up. And we try to make sure that you're somebody that we can treat, which is probably 90-something% of people. And we look at things like pregnancy. Can impact this. If you haven't previously seen a doctor, we cannot treat you first. So there's a lot. I'm not going to get into all the medical stuff, but pregnancy, hepatitis, HIV, a lot of these things impact the addiction population. We can treat most of it. Just depends on kind of their health status, but. Assuming that we know we can get them in the door to at least get started, they sit down with a counselor for about an hour, and we get their history, do an assessment, talk about their psychiatric issues, addiction issues, medical issues. We give them a diagnosis. We refer them into our program. Then we have them get some blood work done. So we're looking to see if there's any major health issues. Like we probably diagnosed 50 people with hepatitis C who previously didn't know they had it. Yeah, it's very, very common with sharing needles. But so that's at least a public benefit outside of what we're doing. But once you get that assessment done and you get some blood work, and we know you're again, like probably 90% of people can come in after the blood work. There are some things that prevent it, like if your liver's damaged in some way. But after that's done, you sit down with a doctor, you have an examination. This is probably anywhere from 3 to 5 days after you call us, and that's a long time for a heroin addict, by the way. So nobody likes to wait. We're trying to shorten that to a day or two. But, they sit down with the doctor, get an exam done, and then we dose them on site with the medication, make sure that they are not made sick by it, any allergies. And that is actually a thing. You can push someone into very severe withdrawal if it's not managed properly, but putting somebody on this medication. So we dose them on site for about 2 hours and then send them home with a prescription. And then they come back every week to see the doctor, talk to us, let us know how they're doing for the first month, and then we see them less frequently as time goes on. So we get to the point where we see people twice a month, or maybe even a little bit less than twice a month, depending on how things go. But yeah, that's basically the kind of the mentality is keeping an eye on them, giving them a chance to go off and do their thing. Some people are heavy meth users, and they probably struggle the most with getting clean, because meth is actually arguably harder to get over than heroin because there's no treatment for it. But at least nothing like that as simple as Suboxone, like a medication. But yeah, it's basically like, think about it, going to the dentist or going to the doctor. You're not staying overnight. We don't keep people. It's like a maintenance program. It allows people to still live their lives where they come back every so often. So.
Gotcha. And so now, how many physicians do you have, and how many clients do you have or have come through the door already?
So we have 2 doctors right now who are prescribing. Our third doctor starts today, actually,
Neat.
which is kind of cool. I got to look at the clock. Yeah, I got a couple hours, but she's starting this evening, and that's going to be exciting. We have 2 more who are signed up and ready to go, and the insurance company, we again race against the clock. You got to wait anywhere from 1 to 2 or 3 months for them to get their bullshit together. But yeah, we have 5 doctors right now who are more or less ready to go. We've got 3 facilities ready to go. Only one of them is currently being used until this regulatory stuff's done next week, and we're at about 150 patients.
Wow, that's impressive. And that's
Yeah.
all basically happened in the last 12 months, right?
We opened in September.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so do you have any idea what kind of your success rate is then with people, with the addiction coming out from under it, or still too early to tell?
So far, we've had 1 person fully successfully complete our program. So the way to think about this is it's kind of like phases. The first phase of treatment is getting used to not being on heroin and painkillers and be like, wow, I'm sober.
Right.
Someone said to me, this is the first time I've been sober in 15 years. And I was like, for more than
Good
4 days in a
Lord.
row. I was like, wow, this is cool. This is really cool. No, seriously,
Yeah.
that's really cool. But I would say more than half our patients have gotten jobs. So that's really important. I'm a job creator in more than one way. And
Yeah,
if you want to look at it like that, which is kind of funny. So yeah, most of them have jobs that didn't have them before. And they're better at getting jobs than we are, I think. But, and then after you look at that phase of got to kind of address the major issues in my life of getting off heroin, getting used to the medication, getting a job, and having more or less getting to stability in home life, then you get to a period of let's focus on some of the darker, deeper issues of what happens when you use heroin for 20 years. How do you address that when you come out of it, or even 5 years, even 2
Wow.
years? So it's not a quick fix. We are a behavioral health facility. We employ psychiatrists, we employ therapists to help them with this, and I would say the average stay, if I would hope to build towards this, would be a year. Not that we want to hold on to people. It's really, I want to get people out the door and get them back to their lives. But some people may stick with us much longer than that. Some may be shorter. It happened that we've been open 7 months. Somebody's already out of the program. That was pretty cool. So
yeah, that's crazy. I guess if somebody's been using, for 20 years, you got to, you think about, yeah, sure, the physical damage and the addiction, but man, even just the psychological damage, the relationship damage, all that stuff, that takes a while to mend.
It does. So, and then, I think, that's what I would say. We've had a lot of people we had discharged too. So you also got to focus on the negatives to say, who are the people we got to kick out of the program? People who are cheating us, who are using the medication we give them to sell it for personal income, things like that do occur. So we keep an eye on things. But and the sad things are the ones where you don't want to lose somebody, but they're not able to stay in your program because they need more help than we can give them right now. And we have the come back once a week kind of thing. If that's not enough treatment, it can't keep you clean, you got to go maybe to a hospital or somewhere else. Right. So, yeah.
Andrew, how old are you?
I am 25.
So 25. What would you tell your 18-year-old self if you had 5-10 minutes to talk to your 18-year-old self? Just go back in time. What would you tell yourself?
I would give myself a list of medications to take. No, I'm kidding.
That's great.
I would. There's a few things that I've learned that I think are kind of interesting. One in particular, if you really care about entrepreneurship, is lower the bar. So the first business you do does not have to be large. It does not have to be gigantic. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just get started and try and figure out a way to get in. So the hardest part is getting in, not necessarily in succeeding or failing. Getting on your feet with something that's operating is one of the most important things you could try to focus on. So if you're starting Tesla Motors, start out by licensing battery tech or something versus trying to build a giant factory. It's not necessarily give away all the things that you do, but try and find a way to make things work. I would say if you're really serious about business, focus on structuring your life around your work rather than what lifestyle it creates or what it can do for you. So really, every day I tell people I manage my weeks, not my days. So I manage my weeks. If I'm sleepy one day, I know that if I force it that day more and I lose more productivity the next day, it's not worth it. Doing everything with a purpose, even if it's not for work, is doing it with a purpose is important. But most of the stuff I do is for work. So, eating a certain way, exercising a certain way, having a certain schedule, all these things are kind of tied together. But if you have values, you have a purpose, have a focus on what you're doing, that really got me a long ways. Specifically for education, I don't know. I think parents are very excited to spend money on their kids for this idea of a college education. If you could just find some way, if your parents are going to pay for things, to kind of tailor that to your mission, your goals, rather than just a college education. They may not be open to supporting you to live in the mountains, having a good time or whatever. But this is not a commentary anyway. My friend also does this, so this is more me talking about my buddy. But it's some of those things are important. I'm trying to think. I would say most successful people are pretty similar. If you study enough of them, you don't need to keep studying them, but you got to read about 10, 15, 20 of them maybe, and the Henry Fords or the Rockefellers of the world, and kind of get a sense of what they were like at your age. Not necessarily what they were like at 45 when they were moving around industries, but look at what they were like at your age. Sam Walton's one of my favorites at our age. Your early 20s, late teens. A guy who started Walmart.
Yeah.
What else? Networking is important. I think I mentioned that to you briefly before. Is this idea of getting in touch with billionaires, getting in touch with people who are really high profile. Rather than just asking for something, is give them something that they value, and maybe being a little interesting about it or being confrontational, and just see how they respond. I called a billionaire guy out who's in Wall Street a couple times a year, Wall Street Journal, about one of his investments. Told him I thought he was wrong, and we started talking, and we've talked a bunch since. But things like that are fun. So
That's awesome. I love it. What's a personal habit that you believe contributes to the success you've achieved so far?
I would say two things, and one I've thought about more maybe the last couple of months, which is odd. I used to do puzzles and race myself, and Sudoku, Rubik's Cube, things like that. I think racing and trying to get your brain to speed up and how fast it can process information is important. I don't know that that's necessarily what happened, but I think it helped me out. And I also think reading is universal. It's like, you got to eat every day, got to drink some water. Oh, by the way, read this book. Please, for the sake of everybody else around you, read some books. So
yeah.
I'm not talking about Harry Potter, of course, but read some books about successful people. I don't like framework books as much. I actually like learning specific topics and kind of figuring them out for myself. But if you're new to a subject, finding the framework book or a framework book that explains kind of on a more general sense what you can do in that field, I think it's important. So.
And speaking of books, what's the book that you'd recommend?
It's probably best to maybe send you a short list.
Sure.
I think, there's some odd ones that stand out to me. Ishmael by Daniel Quinn was a big one that's not really business related.
Is that about it's like an attorney or a lawyer? It's like an older book. It's like a novel.
It's a novel about it's the story of the human race told from the perspective of a gorilla. So.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking of a different Ishmael then.
Okay. Yeah, probably not the same one.
Your book sounds a lot more interesting.
Yeah, no, and it helps you understand your place in humanity. There were some great books on the new Steve Jobs book's way better than the Isaacson one. I would encourage that. I'm gonna have to send you a list. I got to think about that, but yeah,
gotcha.
There's a lot. I hate to list 50.
No, yeah, send me a list and we'll put that in the show notes there. So Andrew, coming down to our last couple questions here before we end, what advice do you have for any of our listeners who are thinking of dropping out of college, but they haven't quite made that step yet?
So I quit a job with no other job to go to. So I know the pain that creates and the stress it puts on other people in your life.
Yeah.
So if you're going to drop out, more power to you. Just make sure there's something on the other end of that decision. It doesn't have to be a great thing, but something that can sort of support you or something, even if it's a friend who lets you sleep on the couch. But just up and dropping something. It's one thing to opt out of something in the world, but it's important to opt back in and have a plan for continuity in some ways, and it doesn't necessarily need to take a year to set up. So I would say that's important. But I would definitely say if you don't see a lot of value in your school, that there's probably a good reason for that, and that a lot of other people who have succeeded in this world would agree with you, even if people next to you don't. So
yeah, totally. And I just want to point out to people listening, it sounds like, Andrew, you obviously didn't see a lot of value in schooling right away, but I think it was in your intro, or you wrote to me at some point, you were an autodidact, and what that means is basically a self-teacher, and that's evidenced by all the time you spent at the library and stuff. Like you weren't participating in class, but you knew what you wanted to learn about, and you were very actively pursuing that with everything you had. And so that's extremely important. I mean, if you're just going to drop out because it's too hard, and you're just going to be lazy all day and watch Netflix and sleep or whatever, dropping out might not be, right for you. But if there's just something else that's burning on your mind and on your heart that you just want to pursue and learn about, then dropping out could be the answer, or maybe stay in school a bit and study like Andrew did until, you've got something to pursue right after you drop out. So you're not just kind of hanging there in no man's land. But anyways, Andrew, what
you could do both at the same time. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
If you're feeling like, man, I can't get my 8th, 9th, 10th hour in the day studying engineering, and I have to go to this crappy class about communicating for engineers or something. They made us do that in accounting. Then maybe the 8th, 9th, and 10th hour, yeah, you don't get it, but know that you will get it once you have something waiting for you. And if you don't have anything waiting for you, then you're not going to have any time to spend on engineering. So that's important.
I like it. Andrew, what advice do you have for any of our listeners who've already dropped out and who are already on possibly their entrepreneurial journey?
I would say reach out to me. No, I'm kidding. But I think it's important to. Well, I like to add my own flair to helping other people. I've got a friend in Australia who I've connected with over the internet, and I'm helping him. I don't want to say I'm doing much for him, because he would be able to do a lot on his own anyway. But I'm helping him contextualize how to talk to VCs, how to work with researching his industry, and know a lot more about what impacts it could make and things like that. And stuff like that is important to get these dialogues going. Not necessarily for me personally. I enjoy it because it's fun, but I think reading itself would get you here regardless. Studying some really, really successful people. If you're already on your feet and succeeding, you will know certain areas that you're probably deficient in. Try and find people that would apply to. I know for me right now, I'm trying to study Julius Caesar and Napoleon. I know that they would help me conquer things better than I already know how to. So that's kind of my mentality.
I like it.
Yeah.
I just think that's a beautiful way to think. I got to conquer this thing in my life. Well, let's study like some of the greatest actual conquerors in the world: Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, Napoleon. And that's great. So, what's the best way that people can connect with you?
Facebook is probably the easiest. Okay. I would say there's the email's good, but I'm going to be most responsive on Facebook and most real time, and I'm pretty good about it. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, successful dropouts, you succeed, and remember, you're the average of the 5 people that you hang around the most, and that includes listening to this podcast. For everything we talked about today, head over to successfuldropout.com and type Andrew into the search bar, and the show notes will pop right up. And as always, stay hungry, stay foolish. For more information about how to drop out, grind, and succeed, go to successfuldropout.com. I also love questions. If you have a question about anything we talked about today, I want to hear from you. Go to successfuldropout.com and click the Ask Me a Question link at the top of the page. Successful Dropouts, if you could go to iTunes and leave a positive rating and review, it would help this show out a lot. I know you're busy, I know you got a lot going on, but if you do that, it helps this podcast rank, it helps other people listen to it and gain value just like you have been. Thank you so much in advance.